Hello, friends. Welcome to Storycraft. On this channel, you will enjoy world top stories. Let's view the video, The Real Story of the Black Prince of England. The Birth of a Legend. On a chilly June night in 1330, Windsor Castle echoed with celebration. Queen Philippa of Hainault had given birth to a boy, Edward of Woodstock, the eldest son of King Edward III. From the moment he opened his eyes, destiny whispered through the stone corridors. Unlike other royal infants, Edward bore an unusual intensity in his gaze, as though he understood the weight of the crown even in the cradle. His father, a warrior king with ambitions to restore England's glory, saw more than a son. He saw a legacy. But no one could predict the shadows that would gather behind the boy's rise. For while England rejoiced, enemies plotted, both within and beyond the realm. The making of a warrior. While other noble children played with wooden swords, young Edward trained with steel. By age 7, he had already begun studying the art of war. His mentors were battle-hardened knights who had bled for the crown, and they molded him not into a prince but into a commander. Latin, law, and courtly manners were part of his education, but so were siege drills, horseback duels, and the strategy of kings. At 12, he rode beside his father in parades, not as a child, but as a future sovereign. His armor, blackened to a gleaming onyx, began to earn him whispers in the court, the Black Prince, a name born not just from his armor, but from the fear he would one day strike into the hearts of enemies. The shadow of the crown. Despite his youth, Edward was no stranger to politics. Court intrigues festered behind velvet curtains. Nobles envied his favor with the king, whispering that a boy so young should not carry such power. Plots formed like storm clouds, and his every move was watched. But Edward was cunning. He learned to read lies in the eyes of men, to predict betrayal. Before it struck, he began to understand that the crown was not just a symbol of rule, it was a battlefield of its own. Even within his own family, jealousy simmered. Some feared he would rise too high, too fast. The call to war. In 1346, at just 16, Edward received his first taste of blood. His father declared war against France, laying claim to its throne. The 100 Years' War had begun. Against the advice of many lords, Edward was given command of his own division. It was a test and a gamble. When the English forces landed, on French soil, the young prince stood tall in his black armor. Locals stared in awe and terror. How could one so young look so cold, so ready? But Edward didn't flinch. This was the path he was born for. The road to Crécy. Marching through enemy territory, Edward faced his first challenge not from the French, but from hunger, disease, and fear. His men looked to him for leadership, and he did not disappoint. He shared their hardships, slept in the mud, and bled beside them in skirmishes. His presence alone was enough to rally the troops, his black armor like a banner of vengeance against France. As the army approached Crécy, rumors spread that the French forces outnumbered them 5-1. Many doubted they would survive the Crécy battle. But Edward, still only 16, stood before his men with fire in his eyes. He did not promise safety. He promised glory. The storm before the battle. The skies over northern France darkened with clouds and war drums. August 26, 1346, on the fields near the village of Crécy, destiny prepared to test the Black Prince. Rain poured in sheets the night before, soaking the English encampment. But Edward didn't sleep. By torchlight, he walked among his men, silent and focused. His presence gave courage. He wasn't just a prince. He was becoming a symbol. Across the fields, the French army assembled. Tens of thousands strong. Heavily armored knights, mercenaries, Genoese crossbowmen. The King of France, Philip VI, believed victory was certain. After all, they outnumbered the English nearly 5-1. He didn't yet understand what he was walking into. The calm of the Black Prince. As dawn broke, Edward, only 16, stood in his black armor at the head of his division. He studied the terrain, the trees, the slope of the land. He saw what others missed. He chose his ground wisely, high, muddy, and perfect for longbowmen. With the wind at their backs and the sun in their enemies' eyes, the English prepared to hold their line. Edward didn't speak much that morning. He gave his orders with clarity, then waited. War was coming, and it would not wait for kings or prayers. The roar of arrows. The French charged first. Thousands of Genoese crossbowmen advanced, loosing bolts into the wind. But the rain had ruined their bowstrings, and their shots fell short. The English responded with a deadly storm of longbow arrows. It was a massacre. The Genoese fled in terror, but the French knights behind them showed no mercy. They trampled their own mercenaries, eager to reach the enemy. Then came the real charge. Wave after wave of armored French knights thundered across the field, banners snapping in the wind, swords raised. But the English lines held. Arrows rained down like iron hail. Horses screamed, men fell in heaps. Still, they came. And at the center, the Black Prince stood firm. Baptism in blood. For hours, the battle raged. French knights reached Edward's line. Steel clashed. Mud turned red. At one point, the fighting around the prince grew so intense, messengers raced to his father, King Edward III, begging him to send reinforcements. But the king refused. He famously said, "Let the boy win his spurs." And win them he did. Edward fought with fury, his black armor splattered with blood. He fought not from the rear, but in the thick of it. His sword rose and fell without rest. His standard never fell. By day's end, the field was a graveyard. Thousands of French lay dead, including dozens of nobles and lords. The English, though battered, stood victorious. The birth of a legend. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers looked to Edward, not as a boy, but as a warrior. He had led them through hell and emerged triumphant. That day, he earned his place among England's greatest heroes. From that moment forward, the name Black Prince would strike fear into the hearts of enemies. Not because of cruelty, but because of brilliance. Ruthless in battle, calm in chaos, unbreakable under pressure. And as the sun set over Crécy, casting golden light over the battlefield, Edward knew this was only the beginning. He had tasted victory, and now he hungered for more. A hero returns. The cheers echoed through London as Edward, the Black Prince, returned from Crécy. Banners flew, bells rang, and the people swarmed the streets to see the warrior prince. At just 16, he had faced one of the mightiest armies in Europe and won. He was no longer just heir to the throne. He was England's shining symbol of power. But glory has a price. Behind the pageantry, jealousy stirred. Nobles whispered behind closed doors. Generals who had once dismissed him now envied him. Even within the royal family, ambitions twisted into silent rivalries. Edward had won the battle, but peace would prove a far more treacherous game. The seeds of division. Edward's father, King Edward III, grew increasingly proud, often comparing his son to legendary kings. But such praise unsettled the court. Some feared the prince's rise was too swift, too blinding. Parliament members questioned how much power a boy should wield. Advisors once loyal to the crown now watched Edward with caution. The king's younger sons, particularly John of Gaunt, began to resent their older brother's fame. Though Edward remained loyal and dutiful, the shadow of competition lengthened. Power was a tempting thing, and the closer he got to it, the more enemies it seemed to create. The Black Prince in Gascony. In 1355, Edward was sent to Gascony, in southwestern France, to command a new campaign. The French countryside burned. Under his swift raids, this was total war. Towns fell, crops were destroyed, and castles were left in ruins. It was effective, brutal, and horrifying. But in the midst of war, Edward showed another side. He held court in Bordeaux, ruled justly, and earned respect from the local lords. He was not merely a conqueror, he was proving he could govern. His court became a beacon of chivalry and elegance, yet every success he achieved abroad only deepened the resentment back home. The road to Poitiers. In 1356, Edward once again found himself outnumbered. At Poitiers, King John II of France led a massive army against him. But Edward didn't flee, he planned. With clever tactics and fearless leadership, he struck with surgical precision. The result was unthinkable. Not only did the English win, but Edward captured the French king himself. He treated the royal prisoner with honor, even dining with him in his own tent. For this, his fame exploded across Europe. The boy who had once sought to win his spurs was now the most feared and admired commander alive. But triumph brought something more dangerous than swords: envy. The betrayal within. Back in England, the mood had changed. The court had grown cold. Whispers of mismanagement in Gascony surfaced. Accusations of overspending, of making promises he couldn't keep. When Edward asked Parliament for funds to maintain his territories, they hesitated. Allies turned distant. Enemies grew bolder. Even his health began to falter. A mysterious illness struck him. Fevers, weakness, pain that never fully left. His once iron grip on his destiny began to loosen. Some said it was the cost of war. Others, that poison moved through his veins, not from a cup, but from betrayal. The very kingdom he bled for had begun to doubt him. A prince in decline. By the late 1360s, the once invincible Black Prince had become a shadow of himself. The illness that haunted him grew worse. His strength faded. His armor, once worn with pride, now felt like chains. Yet even in pain, he led. He rode when he could barely stand. He fought when others would have begged for rest. But the sickness was relentless. Fevers, weakness, wasting. Some called it a curse. Others whispered of divine punishment. Whatever the cause, Edward's body betrayed him more each year. And, with his decline, the balance of power shifted. A kingdom-waiting England waited. The crown loomed ever closer. King Edward III was aging, weary, and tired of rule. The court looked to the prince with anxious hope, but behind every loyal gaze, suspicion brewed. Could a dying man wear the crown? Could the Black Prince rule as king? Edward had a son, young Richard of Bordeaux, just a child, too young to inherit, and too vulnerable. Some lords began quietly maneuvering, forming factions, building influence. If the Black Prince could not rule, who would? Ambition began replacing loyalty. The court, once united under Edward's victories, began to fracture. By Prince's last campaign. In 1370, Edward led one final campaign in France. He was sick, frail, and barely able to ride, but he refused to watch from afar. The town of Limoges had turned against him. He vowed it would pay. The assault was brutal. The town fell, and thousands died. The same prince who once showed mercy now commanded slaughter. Some say it was grief, others rage. But the massacre shocked even his own men. Edward returned to England not as a hero, but as a man broken by war. The throne slips away. By 1376, the end was near. The prince, once destined to rule, could barely stand. In Westminster, as Parliament gathered, he made one final appearance. Draped in black, pale and thin, he begged them to honor his son after his death. The Black Prince would never wear the crown. His body finally failed him on June 8, 1376, just 1 year before his father's death. The throne passed him by. England would never see his reign. Legacy in shadow. Though he died without a crown, his legend never faded. Soldiers still spoke his name with awe. Enemies remembered him with dread. His son, Richard II, would inherit the throne, but without the strength or wisdom of his father. The Black Prince remained what history rarely records, a king who never ruled, yet shaped a kingdom. Legacy of the Black Prince. The echo of a name. Even in death, Edward, the Black Prince, cast a long shadow. His tomb in Canterbury Cathedral became a place of pilgrimage, not for miracles, but for memory. Carved in full armor, hands clasped, in silent prayer, he looked down upon centuries. Visitors stared into the face of a warrior who had never worn a crown, yet ruled the hearts of men. His epitaph read, "Such as thou art, sometime was I." A haunting reminder that even legends must fall. But Edward's story didn't end with his death. The boy who inherited a kingdom. Richard II, Edward's young son, ascended the throne at just 10 years old. Too young, too untested, he inherited not just a kingdom, but the expectations born from his father's legend. The court hoped he would become a second Black Prince, a ruler of strength and glory. But Richard was not his father. He was delicate, artistic, and unpredictable. Where Edward had united, Richard divided. Where the prince had fought, Richard hesitated. The kingdom the Black Prince fought to preserve began to unravel. And yet many still believed that, had Edward lived, England's fate might have been very different. A warrior remembered. Soldiers who once marched under the prince's banner told stories by firelight. Tales of Crécy, of Poitiers, of the black armor that glinted like death in the sun. Nobles recalled a man who fought beside commoners, who led with courage and honor. Even his enemies had respected him, a rare legacy for a man forged in war. Chroniclers wrote of a prince without arrogance, a leader without cruelty, a warrior who sought peace but never feared blood. His legend grew in silence, long after his voice was gone. The turning of the tide. The Plantagenet line continued, but cracks formed where unity once stood. Civil unrest, political chaos, and rebellion plagued Richard II's reign. Eventually, he was overthrown, dragged from his throne by his own cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Some blamed fate, others blamed Richard. But many whispered of the Black Prince's absence. That had he ruled, there would have been no usurper, no tyranny, no fall. England had lost more than a prince. It had lost the future that never came. The immortal Black Prince. Centuries passed. Kings rose and fell. Empires were built and broken. But the Black Prince endured. His story, half victory, half tragedy, lived on in books, poems, and stone, a symbol of what might have been, the king England never had, but always wanted. He was more than just a warrior. He was a legend, forever clad in black. Thanks for watching. Subscribe our channel Storycraft for more interesting videos.